All right, Elias, welcome to the Exciting Minds podcast. How's your morning been?
It's been pretty good. Yeah, got the kids ready to go, and here we are. So,
Yeah, so last time we talked, you were on a hike and everything. Like, I see that you enjoy going out in nature. So, what about nature exactly for you is like pretty, like, why do you like nature so much? Especially in your videos on Instagram, you like always use metaphorical references towards nature.
yeah, I think nature's where I found myself. I think growing up, it felt like there wasn't a whole lot of attention that I got from the adults in my life. Um, and I either had the TV or I had nature. And so whenever I chose nature, that's where I felt free and where I felt like I could like I really discovered life out there, the curiosity and just the freedom just to exist. So I tend to
And
go
like,
out there whenever I'm my looking for thoughts and freedom and breath. So,
like, what kind of thoughts do you get like whenever you're in nature?
anything and everything. Like yesterday, I was thinking about um, for whatever reason, I was thinking about how to justify magic, the magical stuff that I do in my life to my dad, and how that would make sense to him. And you know, just whatever's on my mind, it's just that space to process what's happening in my mind, and then to look at him like, why do I have to justify this thing to my dad? Or like even looking at my own magic, my ideas of what's magical in life. Why is that magical to me? And so, yeah, just it's quiet. There's nothing there, and I feel like you just get a lot of. I can see a lot of inspiration and symbols and just what nature has to offer.
Yeah, and like I think nature is a very enchanted place, at least from my experience.
Oh
Like, yeah,
yeah,
if you get very present and close to, like, if you're in nature and you get very present, you can actually feel just the aliveness of it. The It's almost like there's secrets there. I
oh
had a
yeah,
voice whisper to me once saying like there's secrets in nature. So
oh yeah.
I'm always curious to find those things out. Like I mean, does that resonate with you, or like what comes up to your mind when I mention there's secrets in nature?
Yeah, for me, what I've started looking at is like, I've taken some stuff on alchemy and intuition and whatnot. And so you start looking with alchemy, a lot of it's very symbolic, but the the symbols that we get from it are not necessarily what the culture or society has created for that symbol. But what does it mean to you? And so when I go out to nature, and like when I think I posted some video recently of saying, like, I came up to this tree, I felt like I needed to hug it. And then I looked at the tree and it told me that, at times in its life, it killed off branches and said, this is no longer serving me. And it left it there, and that dead branch gave new life to new things like bacteria and organisms and all these things. And it was just very symbolic in my own life. Like, some things kind of need to die, and like some things just need to move on, and they've had their use, they've had their time. Whether that's a job or whether that's whatever. Like, it's just that was very symbolic for me of just, it's okay not to hold on to everything, to not, we might have created something in life, but um, sometimes those things are ready to move on and give life and space to something new. And so I go out there in nature, and I see those symbols, I see those lessons that are coming from inside my own life. And it's just this nice communication of what's inside me, and what am I learning, and what's happening on this regular basis, and whether there's some life or intelligence out in nature that's actually speaking to me, or it's just my own mind telling me those things. I don't know, but I just know that I like it, and it works.
Yeah. And then I see also you're very much so into like meditation, and like it's always cool hearing you, especially on your videos, describe like what it's like to be present. And so maybe can you go into that? Like, what is it like to be present with yourself and with your, I mean, your current circumstance?
Yeah. Presence is interesting. I guess one of the ways that I see presence is that there's no past and there's no future other than what we are creating right now. So the things that I think about the past are things that I'm just running through whatever narrations have happened in the past. And I think that a lot of times those narrations are skewed. The perspectives of what has happened a lot of times are skewed to the perspective that I'm holding right now. And I've seen this recently as my wife and I have discussed different past events from like our dating experiences, and just to see how those perspectives are different. And same thing with the future. Like we try to project things out into the future, and really they're just our own mental creations of our hopes and dreams or worries or anxieties or whatever that might be. And presence is recognizing that those are all mental creations in my mind. And for a long time, or like, I guess not a long time, but for like when I first started out with meditating, I really focused on just the sensations of the body and trying to ignore the thoughts and the words that were going through my mind. And now it's kind of become, well, let's just sit still and listen, because the thoughts and the words and the visualizations are all coming from my body already. And so in a way, they're repeats of sensations. And so as I sit there, I can just listen to what's happening in my mind, what's happening in my body, what sensations are there, what energy is moving through as I think this one thought. And it just gives me that awareness of what is happening right now, what has been created in my body, and what am I creating by even thinking this thought, or what am I creating by even just being aware and listening to my body. And so that's what I've started to enjoy, and really I've seen that in any of the other practices I do, because I do like this Russian stick work. It's a somatic bodywork type modality, and when I'm under the sticks and someone's doing this massage on me, it's that same idea of presence, that same meditation like state, where I'm able to listen to what's happening with my own body, what am I feeling, and then connecting myself to the sticks and from the sticks to the person who's doing that modality on me, or that work on my body. And as I just sit there and listen to it, it's this beautiful communication of what's happening in life and what's happening to me and what's happening to my body. And so that's how I see presence in meditation. And in a lot of ways, I think I see the answers to life almost just through meditation, in whatever form I'm trying to bring that into my present, whatever's happening right then and there.
Yeah, that's pretty. There's a lot to unpack there, but real quick though, forgive me for my ignorance, but Russian
Yeah,
sticks. Can you probably explain what that is a little bit more? Like, what exactly is
Yeah. So there's this this modality. It doesn't really have a good name to it, because it's just kind of been passed down through select people, select generations, people out in Russia. But basically, the basic description of it is they've got these massage sticks, and we go through the body, we open the body up, and we really look at the fear and the energy that the body's holding on to. And and we see this a lot with people who do massage. We know that the body's holding on to the energies of the past, the energies that we've created. So for me, I hold a lot of tension in my shoulders, the expectations of life, of the world, that's continually held there. And so whenever we are pushing into those areas in kind of this deep tissue like massage, it's opening up those feelings of what's held in that specific area. And so the Russian stick work is using different objects, sticks, and sometimes they'll use swords or whips or different things, not necessarily to hurt the body or to like have someone feel pain, but more, what is this body holding, and how do we open that body up? And so this is something that's come through the origination, believed origination is from the Cossack warriors in Russia, these free people that were, they had freed themselves from any government rule or from any other dictatorship or anything like that. And they were living on their own. And so they would get hired out as warriors to go fight for these different governments or these different people. And when they would go out to battle, they'd come back to their camps and they would do this stick massage on each other to help release the trauma that was being held in the body from going out and fighting, from those traumatic experiences. And so it's just kind of been passed down and through very interesting means of like my trainer's trainer learned it while he was in prison in one of the Russian prison camps. Because I mean, you go to Russia, in Russia, you'll go to prison for speaking out against the government, for doing anything that is not right in line with how the government sees. So this guy had been speaking out against the government, got sent to prison, and while he was there, he learned this Russian stick work, this massage type technique, and really they were helping each other overcome that fear of what was happening in the camps. Because in the camps, they were exposed to the cold. They were suffering a lot in these camps. And that's still going on today. Very similar to probably what we would see in some of like the Nazi type camps, except for I don't know how much they're still doing that, but basically it's a way to help relieve someone from their own suffering, to get over the fear that's happening inside their body and just let go, release, and relax into the experience of life. So that's what that is.
Yeah, and going back to earlier, what you said earlier is you said like the first meditation you kind of like resist your thoughts, and then it became like just you start to then just look at them and then just embrace them and things, or not, you didn't say embrace them, but it seems like you kind of just start to embrace them and then kind of just pay more attention to your thoughts instead of trying to resist it. Again, maybe that's maybe a misconception in meditation where people just try to not think or try to create some kind of another identity, because I think meditation is about removing identities. And so when you bring up your thoughts, you're looking at them and you're experiencing them fully, and then you're allowing them to pass, kind of thing. So it seems like in this method there's this quote that I really like. It's like what you look at or what you fear like persists, and then what you look at disappears. It's kind of just learning how to look at those things, and finding methods that will bring up those different things underneath the surface. So yeah,
and I think one of the things, a quote that I've latched onto is that there's this idea that fighting conflict with conflict leads to more conflict. And so when you go into like a meditation, and you're fighting these thoughts, or you're fighting these different things that are happening in your body, and you're like, no, I shouldn't do this, or no, I shouldn't do that. that conflict leads to you having more conflict, and then you're fighting that conflict again, and then it's just this continual reaction that you're creating inside yourself. But when you just sit there and listen and just say, all right, well, this is just what's going on in my mind, then the thought comes, you listen to the thought, and it kind of just starts to, the energy just starts to die. And it's like, all right, I don't need this thought anymore. It's ran its course. It doesn't need to keep being there, and you move on.
Yeah. And then one thing also you mentioned too, especially in meditation, is like paying attention to sensations that you get in your body. So like whenever you become present with yourself, you're like paying attention to different sensations. So maybe can you go into that? Like, what is it like to maybe have you seen people like when they start to get in touch with themselves? Like, do they actually notice sensations? Because I think some people don't, right? Or some people maybe can. Or what are your thoughts on just paying attention to your bodily sensations and things like that?
Yeah. Again, it's that listening. And that's some of this work that I'm doing with the Russian stick work, is listening to the body. My trainer, he was a cranial sacral therapist for a number of years, and so he's brought that into this Russian stick work. And when you're really listening to the body, it's just relief, where the body just says, oh, thank you for listening to me, and it relaxes, and it just does the thing that it needs to do. And we can do that with ourselves when we turn inward and we start listening to the body. Our body says, oh, thanks for actually listening to me. The things that I've been telling you, this pain that I have in my neck, like, thanks for actually listening and paying attention to whatever the thing that I'm telling you about. And so for me, I look at the energy in my body, and I can manipulate it. I can work on it. I can massage myself. I can do these various things. And if my body tells me to do that, then I'm still listening to the body. But whenever I'm going in and being like, yeah, this, I've got this pain right here, I'm going to shove my finger in there until it releases. It creates more conflict of like, all right, now I got to figure out what to do with this other pain. And so that's kind of where I'm at with a lot of the listening to the energy of the body is, all right, what's it telling me? What is it that you need to know? And kind of either sometimes I give it meaning, and I'm like, all right, cool, this thing's attached to the thing this other thing that's happening in my life. Or sometimes I just say, well, this is just what's happening. And there's flow. Like you can recognize, where's that energy want to go, and like what's holding that there, and what's it feel like, and you can kind of start to narrate it. And once you kind of label it and narrate it, there's some parts where you want to grasp onto that narration, and then at the same time, it almost takes that labeling of what's happening, almost makes it something different than you, and it pulls that sensation that you're holding on to and kind of makes it something different than self. And when you grab onto that and you separate the sensation and the narration and that sense of self, it kind of just opens you up and frees you up to start seeing whatever that sensation is as something different. So pain, for example, when you follow pain through the body and you see the neurons firing, you can almost follow it. Like if I have a pain down through my lower back, I can follow that nerve almost all the way up to my brain, and I can say, wow, that is, like, I see where that's coming from, and it's no longer pain anymore. That's just a sensation. Like the pain itself is actually just the interpretation that I am giving to the sensation. And so you can start to just dissect some of these, the sensations that are happening in the body versus how we are interpreting those sensations and what we're calling those, and letting go of those interpretations and those narrations, and just letting the body be whatever it needs to be.
What's like an example of like a sensation that goes on, or an example of like maybe a misinterpretation of the energy, and then once you know, deconstruct it, then it releases or has its full energetic expression, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So going back to the stick work that I do, so this is like the sticks are going in deep into the body, and so it's a pretty deep tissue massage for part of it. And in that deep tissue, when you get into that deep tissue, a lot of times you're experiencing pain, and a lot of times when you feel that pain, you feel that shock in your system, you clench, you tighten up, you defend that pain that you're holding on to, and it's your mind holding on to that sensation itself. But what's really cool about this, like the martial arts aspect of this modality, is that we're teaching people to breathe, to relax. You know, I've got a stick in your shoulder, and you're like, that hurts a lot, but you're like, all right, well, relax your butt, relax your legs. And when you bring your mind to somewhere else and you're not so focused on that sensation, then it creates that ability to just relax and let go. And the narration or the interpretation, and I don't want to say that it's a misinterpretation, because it's still your mind trying to make sense of what's happening in your body. But when you're able to no longer be so focused on that sensation and the interpretation of that sensation, you kind of just melt and relax, and your body just says, okay, this is here. You know, what else can I do? And once you let go of needing to hold on to that interpretation, it just kind of goes away, and it's just sensation, or it's just there. You know, the sticks it's like we'll do acupressure on the body with some of the sticks, and we'll hold the stick in a specific energetic point, like a knot or whatever. And a lot of times people say, that hurts, and then you help them relax, you help them let go, and then the sticks just go further and further and further into the body as they relax. And before you know it, the sticks are contacting the bone, and it's not hurting the person anymore. It's just sensation. Their body has let go of that need to hold on to the tension that they're holding. And we can do this just kind of by listening to our own bodies, and saying, all right, this thing, I have tension here. All right, well, what's there? Where does it connect to? And like just listening. And the more we listen, the more our body says, oh, I don't need to keep holding on to this. This is too much narration, too much interpretation than what it actually needs to be. That makes sense at all? Or
Yeah, no, I follow along. So sometimes I have to unmute myself because I don't want any background noise coming in. But yeah, but so like with, or what do you call it, with sensations, right? What are some sensations that people? What's like a list of sensations, not just in still work, but just like in meditation in general? Because like I know that people experience different things, such as heat, or maybe an intense buildup of energy sometimes, or what can be like a list of sensations that maybe you've gone through or have experienced in meditation. Can you like maybe put words on it?
Yeah, I don't know. I guess sensation could just be anything. It's your five senses, but even then, there, so a lot of times we describe more than just the five senses. But a lot of times it's pressure, and I think a lot of times we can see any sensation as some form of touch, of some sort of or some sort of pressure on the body, like chemical reactions coming in, and creating more chemical reactions to feed neurons that tell the brain what's happening down below. And so as we kind of dissect those sensations, whether they're heat or whether they're tingling, like it's all just, for me, it's all just energy. Just whatever I'm feeling, that is the energy of the body. And I remember reading my first introduction to the energy of the body was someone, that I was reading a book, and he's like, yeah, focus on your third eye center right in between your eyes, and you'll feel tingling there. And I did that, and I felt it, and I felt the tingle. And then I started moving my attention around my body, and like could feel the tingles around my eye and through my cheek and through my nose. And so a lot of times we're ignoring all these sensations that are happening in our body, and we can bring those sensations to life just through attention. Where we put our attention will be what we are sensing at that time. And so a lot of the listening I do is like, all right, who's screaming the loudest in my body right now? And what is that trying to tell me? And then just kind of go from there. Sometimes I try to move that energy, but just however we describe that energy, it's all energy, and our interpretation of it. And as we understand that, and as we break it down and listen more and more and put more narration around, like more description around it, not necessarily a description as in this has some deep meaning for me in my life, but necessary, or that we need to hold on to, because it can always change. And I think the change is the beautiful part. But the more we look into it, the more we start to be able to create our own narration and meaning in life. Like we can say we have had this sensation in our body, and then we can give it our own meaning. And whether that's happiness or sadness or excitement or whatever, we can add, almost adding fuel to that sensation. And then we start to be able to kind of manipulate some of the emotions that we're feeling, or manipulate the way we're experiencing the world, or the perspectives that we have going on around us. And I think that was a huge tangent to what you actually asked for, of just a list of sensations. But anyways, that was just what was in my mind.
No, that was good. I want to get into maybe the creation process, but first, like, I want to address maybe a thought that came into my head where, like, and this happens to me too, right? Like, if I focus on the third eye, for example, the sensations that come up for me, like right now, is, I mean, even as you're talking, it's just intense pressure. Like, that's one thing that I do experience. But why do you think that in certain points of the body you experience that versus maybe some points it's not as intense? Is that because, like, it's an energy center that energy can kind of find itself stored into? Like, do you think when something is built up like that and you start to feel like tingling and pressure, is that just because one center is full of energy? Or is that, like, what do you think it gets filled? Or, like, why do you think the sensation becomes very apparent in the moment?
I think it has to do with this idea of attention and kind of neurons. You think about your heart, the different chakras that are in your body. So you got, your pelvic floor, your sacral, the names aren't probably very specific right now to me. I just kind of have general points of the body, but kind of your sternum area, and your chest, and your throat, and your third eye, and your crown. All of those areas have a concentration of neurons, of more neurons than you would in other general areas of the body. And so I think once you put your attention on those areas, you can start to fire those neurons more. And I don't know what in our brain decides that we can focus our attention on the specific areas of our body. But as we and I think this is another beautiful part about it, is that our power comes through attention. What we give our attention to is what we give life to in our own life. Um, and so as we give attention to these different areas of the body, we start to feel those sensations more, and we're giving them more life, more energy, more power, because that's where we're directing the flow of our mental energy. Um, and so I think that's part of it, is you just start directing that energy, that focus on where do I want to feel this thing in my body. And I think there's just certain areas that scream louder or communicate louder than others. Um, and you know, that's, I think a lot of it has to do with the neurons that are there, where we're holding our patterns of tension. Um, patterns of tension will create a lot more stimulus than areas that are relaxed. A relaxed area is kind of normal. It's kind of like when you're walking and you don't really feel your pants rubbing against your legs, but it's always happening. It's always sending those sensations up to your brain. But your brain's like, yeah, this is normal. It's not really something that's necessary for my current state of being. And so if we had turned on all of the sensations, all the neurons in our body, it just would be an overwhelm of processing for our brain. And so our brain follows what is out of the normal state the most. And so when we feel even just a very light touch on our hand when it's not supposed to be there, our brain says, oh, there's something happening there that's not normal. And so it puts our attention on that space. A mosquito bites us. That's where our attention just went. Our brain said, hey, there's an invader over here. Go smack that, go get rid of it. And so I think that's really what's happening, is our brain is looking at what's not normal going on in our body, and where do we need to direct some of that energy flow. And it just happens that a lot of our energy flow goes to those centers of where the neurons are the most. And so for me, like, I have when I'm doing some of the massage work, my lower abdomen is a huge point of where neurons are, and there's a lot tied up in there. And so someone pushes on that even lightly, and I start to tense up, because I'm like, oh, that's painful. And then I work through it, breathe through it, and eventually my body says, oh, it's not that bad. This is just pressure right now. So yeah, that's kind of what I think of that.
Yeah, and then going back to your point on like creation, right? It's like you talk about how we give meaning to the different sensations, like, and I mean, just another example too would be like, maybe you're in extreme pain, maybe extreme heartbreak, right? And then like you feel that sensation in your heart of it breaking, and you can either maybe use that for fuel and then get more stuff done and more growth, and you can kind of create a story where it's just like, like you're unstoppable, like you have nothing to lose and things like that. Or you can just get depressed and defeated and just be like, yeah, this sucks, like, I hate women, I don't know, whatever story you come up with.
Yeah.
All those kind of things, or I hate men, things like that. But yeah, I mean, just adding on to that was kind of a story that came to my mind, where it's just like, yeah, people definitely, pain is definitely another sensation that people feel and will tie meaning to automatically. So we always do what you're saying, either consciously or unconsciously.
Yeah.
So it's pretty interesting stuff how we create those kind of stories.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I think with that as well, like I've been experimenting a lot with my, like, when I get sick, or even like I've gone through a lot of depression probably the past 6 months, because of the specifically because of the transitions I've gone through with like beliefs, and with just various transitions in my own life, and creating that cognitive and bodily dissonance in my body, and my body is saying, whoa, slow down, here's some depression for you to work with for a little bit. So just to get you to stop doing so many changes. And instead of trying to like fix that and be like, yeah, I don't want to be depressed, I'm like, all right, what's here? Like, what's my body trying to tell me? And it just becomes this beautiful communication of, hey, my body's having sensations. It's having things that its own intelligence is working in the way it needs to work. And I get to kind of be with that and create the narration or create the perspective that I want to hold on that. And I could say, I don't want this depression here, or I don't want this sadness or this anger or whatever, but I think there's something beautiful about being with those feelings and those emotions that our body generates in our life, and how we're relating to the outside world with our body and our mind. Yeah, and I feel like I've seen a lot of. My mind keeps going to this thought of bodily alchemy, of like you're breaking down the sensations of your body, breaking down the mind, and seeing how it all associates together, and then you get to create something new from it. And I think to your point with emotions, emotions are a huge driver in our life. There was a time where I was just working through this inability to choose for myself. And I sat with that emotion. I sat with it until finally that emotion snapped. And I went and, at the time I went and bought this expensive computer, and my wife saw that, and we had to talk about it. And it was just nice coming forth of like, yeah, these are the things that are going on in my life. And I guess I don't really actually care about the computer as much, but it brought me out of that state of these are the things going on in my life. And I think those emotions can be beautiful drivers to help us start to be honest with ourselves and to recognize our own patterns that are happening continually in our body.
Yeah, I mean, also when you mentioned depression too, and like how your body's kind of or like it's how you interpret it, where it's just like you have all these things going on, and then your body's telling you to slow down. It's actually interesting the effect that depression has on you, where it gives you more of a level-headedness, I think, about
Yeah.
situations. So like if you experience more of a depressive state, you're kind of just slow, in a sense, like you kind of slow your mind down a little bit more, and you're just grounded more than most people. Whereas people that necessarily aren't as depressed, I mean, yeah, people who aren't as depressed don't have that level of slowness or like groundedness that other people can get. Maybe,
Yeah.
so I guess maybe it's an imbalance in a sense where it's like you're underneath and you're way more slower than other people, but it gives you some insight and perspective into other things as well, which it can be a gift and a curse, right? I mean, you can obviously be completely level-headed and balanced, and think correctly like that. But then, yeah, going underneath underneath the surface gives you another perspective on things, and so you can always. It's very interesting what you can get out of these kind of states when you enter into them. So
Yeah. And there's
I want to
I
bring.
kind of see life. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, go ahead. Sorry. No, go ahead. I was gonna ask another question, but go ahead.
I kind of see life as this kind of balance of like fear and love, because like a lot of times we fear our own emotions. We fear being depressed, or we fear being sad, or we fear anger. And that's been a big exploration for me. Is what are these emotions, and why do I keep hiding from them? For a long time, I was really good at not showing any anger or showing any sadness, and in not being with those emotions, I was also creating this lack of joy and lack of happiness in my life. I was in this really weird middle state. And as I've dived into like anger, into sadness, into depression, I feel like my joy and my happiness have also, like, as I dive into those emotions, the other feelings of happiness and joy have gone up as well. Like those have been more intense feelings, and I feel way more happy when I feel happy, and way more excited when I feel excited. And so I think sometimes living that life full of emotion really creates that contrast and that dynamic for who we are. And I think that's what a lot of my exploration is, why am I fearing this emotion, and where, why can I just be with that emotion and love it and accept it for what it is, instead of trying to hide it and protect other people from the fact that I actually have feelings in life.
Yeah. You talk about, I mean, one thing that I found interesting in Instagram was like, you talk about the pendulum, or like something like, can't remember specifically in the context that you said it, but I think you talked about when you meditate, how you experiencing someone like a pendulum. Can you kind of go into that and like,
Yeah. Pendulums are really interesting because sometimes it kind of goes back to that idea of conflict. Um, like when you are applying a force to something, you you're creating equal and opposite force, or you're creating the forces to go into other directions. So I push on the table and the table pushes back on me. And the table might bend a little bit, and when I bring it back up, it springs back up. So when we push our energy in a certain direction, it's going to want to swing back. It's going to want to create that balance. And anytime we have any sort of desire in our life, any action that we take, there's going to be a balance to what is happening with that action. So with meditation, something that I was finding is that I would meditate and I would sit in that silence, or sit in that quiet space, and especially if I kind of was doing that conflicting type meditation, as I was talking about, of like really trying to get myself to sit in the silence, of not having thoughts, of clearing my mind. As I would create that, I would see the swing where my thoughts would just go and go and go, and I would just be super productive on something. And this is the technique that a lot of flow people who are working with flow, and like productivity, that's a technique that they'll do, is that they'll sit for a little while, stare at a wall or stare at nothing for 10 minutes, and then your brain is in this state of, all right, let's do something. Let's expend this energy. You've built up this energy in me. You've held it back, and now the floods want to go. And so the pendulum, a lot of the times, is just that balance. What there's energy always coursing through our body, and when we're not expending that energy, it tends to build up, and then we get to use that energy for the way that we want to. And it's similar with like Instagram. If you're constantly like scrolling on Instagram, TikTok, if you're constantly scrolling on all these social media platforms, and then you're using your attention energy towards all those things, and then when you try to go be productive on something else, you're like, yeah, but I've just used all my energy, all my attention towards this social media. And so you kind of get this mediocre energy use for a little while. But I think that's something I've really loved about meditation, is that when I sit in that silent space, I can create a buildup of energy, and then my body wants to go and use that energy. And whatever I put my attention to, my body is like, yeah, let's go do this energetic thing. And my body doesn't care what it is. It's just like, yeah, let's just use it because it's here, and I don't want to use it. I don't want to have it anymore. And that's kind of a fun thing too, is like when you have these habits in your mind, it's your body just trying to expend energy. And that's what we've been used to doing, is just, I have this energy. I don't really want to, I need to put it somewhere. But the more we can sit with that energy, so the more we create this feeling of stillness, the more energy our body will build up. And then the more energy we have, the more we can put that energy towards the life that we want to create, the experience that we want to have, whether that's creating the perspective or the narrative, or creating the, even just the physical experience of life. As that energy builds up in those moments of stillness, we find that that excitement to just go out and do whatever it is, because our body just wants to use up that energy. And that's a lot of that. We see that a lot with all the different patterns that we have in our life. It's just our body trying to find patterns of ways to use the energy that's constantly flowing through us.
Yeah, so it's so interesting what you said. I read this book called Reality Transurfing. I'm not sure if you heard of it, but it basically described that concept of pendulums and things like that. Kind of like how you said it, where like you kind of push in one direction, but then life brings it back the other way like that. I mean, and then in the context of like building your dream life, right? It's like you want this dream life, but in a sense, your thought energy isn't there. So whenever you kind of think about something, you kind of light up a certain sector or a certain place in an alternative reality or something where that thing already exists. So once you start to think about it, your thought energy goes there, but then to be able to intend and have your intention to do those things is kind of like another step. And so you kind of need to free your mind from those different pendulums that your mind finds itself in. So those different things where you find your mental energy, where you're pushing in certain directions and they're not going a certain way. Like once you start to learn to become like balanced like that or still like that, then it stops those pendulums. And then, like you said, it creates more energy within you to actually do the things you want to do. Because it's just an issue of imbalance where like people find themselves in situations where they're too this way or too this way, and then they don't see the clear answer because they don't have that stillness. And then that could also be kind of a thing where people then try to create the stillness, but then like again it becomes that loop. So you just have to learn what it's like to be an observer and a watcher of things rather than try to force and control things, which is another state of being, so
Yeah.
which is why, I mean, you brought up in your Instagram the symbol of an eagle, which I think that's a perfect kind of symbol to meditate on, to kind of get that watcher state, if you will, or being that kind of observant, sharp mode. At least for me, that's kind of like I've thought about and I've meditated on the symbol of an eagle as well, and I think that's kind of like what I get out of the symbol of an eagle, where you're just looking at things from above and you're just sharply looking downwards for the next thing or something like that. But I mean, I know that's a very symbol that you like, and what are your thoughts on the symbol of an eagle?
Yeah, so I think the symbol of eagle for me was coming up a lot with freedom, this idea of freedom, being free to do whatever I want to do. And actually recently I've been having kind of this issue with the very thought of freedom, because as soon as you introduce that thought of freedom, you've introduced the thought that you are trapped, that there's something to escape from. And again, it's that pendulum balance. Like I've created this feeling of I need to be free, which means that I've also created this balance, this other dualistic state of I'm also trapped. And I think a lot of what we're creating, even just with our language, especially with our language, is that once we create a concept or an idea in our mind, we are creating the equal and opposite force, the opposite idea that is going to counteract the concept that we just created. And so that was something that's been coming up lately, is like even just the idea of being free just created the conflict in me to also feel like I'm trapped, which created more internal strife in me than I was feeling like I didn't really need in my life at the time. But it was an interesting lesson to see that. But again, I think it's this balance of what we create in one side, we're going to also create on the other side. And that's a hermetic principle so that pendulum swing is a hermetic principle, that there is balance in all things, that the pendulum will continue to swing both ways. And so, yeah, I think I love the visualizations that I create, especially with being an eagle, of soaring and just seeing everything. But I've found that as I create those images, or at least those desires, because I think life is exists based off of desire. What is our desire of anything? Like if something isn't desired, if there's not a force to push the energy a certain way, then it doesn't go anywhere. The energy stays right where it is. But as we have desires, as we have a push towards something, it's going to create that pendulum, that balance in our life, like you were saying. And so the eagle is really interesting to bring that up at the time that it did, because it also helped me look at my feelings of being trapped. What is this feeling that I have of being trapped in the family life or at work or relationships in different ways? And as I looked at that feeling of being trapped and that feeling of wanting to be free, I was able to say, oh, this is where my conflict and my tension is being held right now. And I think there's something beautiful in creating those desires so that we can see the balance. And it's almost like creating creating a dual nature so that we can come back to one. So that's kind of what I see with that.
Yeah, or bringing back the pendulum thing too. It's like, at least I personally have observed how whenever you want to go into a positive aspect of life, yeah, the negative aspect also comes as well. So like, and I also have people on my show kind of talk about this concept or bring up the concept of like, you can't really go into like heights unless you go into like the depths or the negative part. So then once you have the positive force and then the negative force, then it brings you to that neutralizing force. So once you kind of experience both sides of the pendulum, then you can kind of start to get balanced and kind of feel where it is to be like in the middle like that, and you start to like stabilize, which is very interesting.
Yeah.
And you kind of did talk about that earlier with when you mentioned how when you can feel your depression and things like that, like then you can now start to feel the joy and everything way more better, and like the happiness, and you kind of find your kind of gauge or feel into that, the happiness, things like that more. But
Yeah.
super interesting. So
Well, and I think that's something that I've experienced a lot too, is that because I've gotten into breath work a bunch, and I use breath work to like eliminate some of the feelings in my body. And, to get out of anger, to get out of sadness, to get out of feeling stressed or worried or whatever. But in creating that feeling of peace or calm or happiness, that depression or anger or sadness or worry was still there because my mind was still creating it. And I found that like as I sit in those emotions, as I sit with those narrations that are saying that this thing's hard or this thing's bad, as I sit with it and understand it, that's where I create a place where it starts to change. Because if I eliminate it with something else, just as I create the conflict with not wanting to be with the emotion, it almost just creates that it's that emotion still is there, and the narrations that were creating that emotion are still with me. And so really I've kind of just changed my state of being, and I'm not addressing the root cause of what was creating that emotion to begin with, or that feeling of discomfort, or that feeling of fear, really.
yeah, definitely. So going to a close here, is there any like topics that you want to bring up, like any last topics or any last thoughts that maybe you'd want to touch on?
Yeah, I guess something that I was realizing yesterday is that I was talking to my trainer and he went on a whole bunch of tangents. But one of the things he was talking about with the stick work and the meditation and breath work is that there's this sense of self in every layer of our being. So there's a sense of self in ourselves. There's a sense of self in the cells that are part of our body. There's a sense of self in the organs. even down to the atoms and the quantum levels. Being like there's a purpose or a meaning or a drive to do whatever that's doing. And one of the cool things to show this sense of self is they've taken frogs skin cells, and they've stripped them of their electron kind of the electric field around their cell, and they stop doing anything. If they had that electron force around their cell, then they started dividing and they started multiplying and they started doing the thing that they were needed to do. And it's this idea that we have this sense of self that we are holding on to, that we need to be a certain way, that we need to have a certain meaning, we need to have a certain purpose. And as we have that sense of self, that sense of meaning, we're creating our own suffering a lot of times. And I think there's an aspect to not creating that suffering. But I think what I'm really looking at is being with that suffering so that I can understand it better, so that I can grow with it and see the different dynamics of life. So there's also this balance of being with the ego, the self, and also allowing the self to disintegrate. And I think as we play with that dynamic of giving something meaning and taking away the meaning, we start to navigate the creation of life, the experience of life even more. And I think that's something that I'm really playing with right now, is giving things meaning. And what meaning do I want to experience at this time? What purpose do I want to give something, experience it, so that I can understand more about life? And that seems to, for me, I think that's what I see kind of the purpose of life, is to give things meaning, to create our experience here now, and just experience what it's like to have desire and to suffer through that desire. Because I don't know, I haven't experienced a lack of suffering in life as much as I just experienced this dynamic, this contrast, this duality of what it's like to be human, to really have a human experience. And so I feel like that's kind of my current journey and exploration at the moment.
Yeah, I think a lot of people find that that's definitely the kind of their journey too, where they're experiencing all that kind of stuff, all those different polarities, and the ups and downs and all that kind of stuff. So that's beautifully put, I would say.
Yeah.
So, where can people find you, by the way?
Yeah, so I've got TikTok. I post more videos on, and Instagram. Both of them are Create with Elias. And then I have a website called borntocreate.life. Just kind of this idea that we're born to be creators of our own life, kind of a co-creation between what already exists in our being. And then I'm creating a podcast with some friends called Shift Hit the Fan. So people being the fans of the podcast, and the shift is hitting them. So yeah, just shifting perspectives and ways of being.
Yeah, that's funny. All right, cool. So yeah, everyone be on the lookout for his podcast, and yeah, thank you for coming on once again. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for the invite.